St. Timothy Catholic School joyfully instills a love of Christ and empowers every child to achieve, lead, and serve with integrity and compassion. Most of us grew up in a school system that practiced a pretty traditional form of discipline. I grew up with it in my home, and oftentimes we may think, well, we didn't turn out so bad. While this is certainly true, at St. Tim's we strive to bring a more practical approach to student discipline, one that aligns more closely with our faith, with the hope of accomplishing the very same results, raising faithful followers of Christ and future saints. You entrust your children to us each and every day, and you do so with the expectation that we will teach them. The graphic you're seeing now is something that really shapes our way of thinking as educators. When kids are not sure how to do something, it is our duty to teach them. This principle must apply to behavior as well as academics. Our philosophy of discipline here at St. Timothy's is modeled after the preventive system of St. John Bosco. This system is rooted in strong connections between educators and the children they serve. Like St. John Bosco, at his oratory, we aim to have strong connections with all the children in our care. For St. John Bosco, those relationships would decrease the likelihood of disruption at his oratory, as the kids would strive to not disappoint the man for whom they cared a great deal, just as a child does not want to disappoint their parents. John Bosco also understood the importance of setting age-appropriate expectations for his students, as well as creating a highly engaging learning environment. This is one of my favorite quotes from St. John Bosco because it encapsulates God's intention for young children, but it also acknowledges a limit to that intent. It's also worth noting that in the history of our humanity, there have only been two perfect children, and neither Jesus or Mary, the Mother of God, go to St. Tim's. So the possibility of wrongdoing by any one of the children in our school is probable, and our expectations acknowledge such a probability. This preventive system also calls for us, the adults in charge, to remove temptations from the kids to set them up for the greatest level of success. Take, for example, a 5-year-old at the dinner table. And forgive me if I've shared this analogy with you previously. You set a piece of cake down in front of the child, and you excuse yourself for a moment by saying simply, "Don't touch that, I'll be right back." It is our belief that regardless of the age of the child, that if we return to that room and the child has succumbed to the temptation we have dangled right in front of them, that it is a big shame on us, the adults. Of course, in an ideal world, the child would say, "Yes, sir," or "Yes, ma'am," and not touch it. But that's really not the point. We set the child up to fail, so we shouldn't have the audacity to be upset with them after we created the situation. Another pivotal component of student discipline is in our modeling of the behaviors we wish to see. Picture for a moment a teacher who is coming down on his or her students on a regular basis. A teacher who is sarcastic to the kids and lowers their self-esteem. Then imagine that same teacher trying to teach the kids how it is important to speak compassionately to others. What a confusing message that would send to a child. We can't teach what we don't have. This is perhaps the most important piece of the behavior puzzle. There are two primary goals anytime consequences are given. One, to ensure that the offender learns why the behavior exhibited is unbecoming of a gentleman or a lady. And two, to not have the behavior occur again in the future. The second reason mentioned there is the primary reason why we do not support the more traditional model of detentions or demerits. Take a moment and think back to your days in high school. If you're anything like us, you are remembering that the same students were the ones in detention day after day. That tells us one thing. The kids are not learning from the detention, and they are continuing to disrupt the learning environment thereafter. Thus, the consequence being given is not effective. Effective consequences are individualized. They are correlated to the misbehavior, and they are timely. Any parent with multiple children can attest to the fact that every child is vastly different and responds differently to feedback than their siblings. This is further evidence to why a one-size-fits-all discipline policy is not applicable to our faith community because of the diverse needs of the learners and differing motivators behind each behavior. we also believe that parents should be informed of their child's behavior challenges and the consequences that the child received. Even on issues that aren't seen as major, early intervention is key. Intervening in small offenses can prevent more serious offenses from occurring in the future. Students and families have a right to confidentiality. The consequences required of a student are to benefit them and repair any damage to specific relationships or property. No one else is entitled to this information. Our long-term goal is that there will be a trust grown between home and school, so that although you don't know what specifically occurred to rectify the situation, that something was done in effort to have the behavior subside. Of course, if the behavior then does occur again, we own the responsibility of not providing an effective enough consequence in that instance. Much of this goes back to our expectations of a school day for our children. There are 750 kids with 750 different personalities. While it is our dream to have a school where kids are not bothering one another or doing things to harm their peers or disrupt the learning environment, we are realistic enough to know that this is not a logical expectation for any school, so we tailor our expectations accordingly. We would also like to debunk the notion that misbehaviors should not be occurring at a Catholic school. No human being at our school is better than anyone else here or at any other schools. But where our advantage does lie, aside from having supportive parents who want to partner with us and discover solutions, is that we are blessed to be able to tie our faith into every interaction we have with a child and bring everything back to Christ, our sole purpose in life. As leaders of the school, it is our duty to do our best to emulate Jesus Christ, clearly a duty at which we will fail on a daily basis. Based on what we know about Christ's teaching, the Catechism, and Scripture, we cannot picture Jesus Christ, the teacher of teachers, yelling at kids and waving their fingers in their faces. So that is why you also will not see that here. Whether we are talking about a student with special needs or a student whose parents are getting divorced, every single person who enters the school building is carrying a cross of some kind, and they're carrying it on a daily basis, and sometimes multiple crosses. The school does not always know what these crosses are for every child, which would stand to reason that the rest of our student and parent population would certainly not be privy to that information either. This further solidifies the need for an individualized discipline system. Though no misbehavior is condoned, it is certainly easy for us to sympathize with a child misbehaving who just lost a relative versus a child who is not carrying that same cross. This is why St. Teresa of Calcutta's quote is so applicable. We show compassion to someone who's going through something hard, but it would be equally unjust of us to let him or her get away with it simply because of the aforementioned cross. Finding that balance is where Christ is most present and where true learning occurs. So what do we do at school to prevent behaviors from occurring in the first place? Well, we train teachers in restorative practices. If students are part of a genuine classroom community where everyone is a valued member and feels such, then misbehaviors will greatly diminish. We employ an outside behavior specialist to observe students and consult with teachers. We offer students second and third chances and fourth chances, so long as they are striving to improve and parents are partnering with us. That's an important one. We have teachers collaborate with other teachers and about possible solutions. No complaining involved, only solutions. We have teachers observe other teachers. We create orderly procedures where students are supervised for every moment of the day. If students are unsupervised during misbehavior, we own part of that blame, and that all goes back to St. John Bosco's preventive system of discipline, removing temptations. Unsupervised kids is a major temptation. If we think as adults all of our wrongdoings in life, all of the sins that we confess to the priest, we're probably by ourselves when we make a lot of those sins, aren't we? This is certainly not something we take pride in either, but if we've worked with the child, we've put all the preventive measures in place, we've tried partnering with the parents, and the disruptions are still regular occurrence, then at that point, then it might be a more permanent solution for the family or the child. Let's say, for example, I'm a parent and I email the school and say that my son is being teased by a classmate. As the school, do we go right into the classmate and issue a consequence? No way. Why? Because we don't know the entire story yet. Again, only 2 perfect children in the history of humanity, and neither of them go to St. Tim's. So there is a possibility that details were omitted. Sometimes kids forget, or sometimes they left out the fact that they provoked the misbehavior that occurred. So what would we do in that instance? First, we would speak to the child directly to find out what exactly happened. Of course, the parent already filled this in on what the child told them, but we want to talk to the child directly. Who else witnessed it? I would ask the child. What prompted the behavior, etc. Like I said, a vast majority of misbehaviors directed towards another child are provoked. Sometimes unknowingly, they rolled their eyes, they looked at them weird, and there's trying to get to the root of that really helps us figure out what's going on. If no other students were present, and the other child denies the misbehavior, this is very common, unfortunately, we would then communicate with all the specials teachers, recess monitors, and classroom teachers to monitor those specific kids more closely. We separate their seats, and lastly, we call the parent of the child that was accused just to let them know that we spoke to them in our office and that they were accused of wrongdoing. And at the very least, that puts this on the parent's radar and hopefully encourages a discussion at home. That's all part of the process too. If the kid understands that home and school are on the exact same page, then wrongdoing is going to plummet. I promise you that. If the accused child admits the wrongdoing, then we call the parent to let them know, encourage conversation at home, and issue a consequence. Depending on if this behavior has occurred before, and if the parent is partnering with us, will depend on what we do for a consequence. Depending on the age of the child, we may have them write a note to the person who they've been bothering. If the relationship is still salvageable between the 2 kids, then we may have them come in for a lunch together with us or the school counselor. We may have them present to the class about what being a good friend looks like. They may have to provide examples of nice qualities about every child in the class. Another hypothetical. A child is using their Chromebook in an inappropriate manner. What we would do first is send the Chromebook report to the parent. The software monitoring it sends a PDF to our emails. We review them, and anything that's a red flag we would send to the parents. On the first occasion, we wouldn't want to embarrass the child by having a separate conversation with them privately. 99% of these situations occur outside of school hours. So what we do when we send that email is we stress to the parents the need for supervision. If it does happen during school hours or on more than one occasion, what we might do, again, depending on many factors, is have the child do a report on a saint that ties into the misbehavior. In an instance of inappropriate or lewd material being searched on the computer, we might have them do a report on St. Augustine, because St. Augustine is a saint who struggled with lust before finding his path to God. So the kid would look at it as punitive because they have to do extra work, an extra assignment. We would put the parents on alert so they could work with them on the report and also bring the faith more strongly into the home. And at the same time, the child is learning that they're not shut off from God. Look at St. Augustine. He just went through the same exact things, but he found the right path, and he's learning about the saint at the same time. And a third hypothetical we'll provide for you is a child is consistently a disruption in the classroom. What we would do first is empower the teacher to discover the best solution to the issue. Our teachers are very self-aware. They know that the first place they must look when there's a problem in their classroom is at themselves. In some instances, if they rearrange the seating or create more engaging lessons, the problem will subside. In other cases, however, after they look within, they realize that they have the proper protocols in place, but the child is still misbehaving. That kind of speaks to our philosophy for the entire faith community. If there is a school-wide problem in the building, then the administration first needs to look at ourselves. What are we doing? Are we not preparing the teachers well enough? Are we not giving them the tools they need to help the kids be successful? If the answer is yes, okay, then we look outward. Our first instinct cannot be to point fingers. And that applies for the students. If a student fails a test, the first place they should look is at themselves. If a parent is upset that the student failed the test, the parent should first look at themselves. Did they help the student prepare? If the answer is yes, okay, then go to the child. And then if all else fails, reach out to the teacher. Maybe there's more information that they can provide. We can't be a finger-pointing community. And we aren't. In most cases of misbehavior at St. Tim's, the child is being fueled by others. So the simplest way to break that is to get the offender in a one-on-one situation and build a stronger relationship with them. If the child cares for the teacher, they are not going to make the teacher's life more difficult. And the children only care for the teachers who care about them first. The best time of day to do this is during a child's lunch. Going back to the recess, we don't take recess away. That only punishes the teachers or the teachers who have that child in the afternoon. The student looks at having lunch in the teacher's classroom as punitive because they're missing their social time with their friends at lunch. And it's a good opportunity for the teacher to engage with the child in a one-on-one setting and grow that relationship and establish a stronger rapport. Student discipline is something in which we take great pride and even greater seriousness. Students come to school to learn, and that is what we as the educators were hired to do, teach. We will continue to partner with families to help every child get or remain on the correct course so that they may lead a fruitful life as good citizens, faithful followers of Christ, and ultimately, in many, many years, saints. Until that glorious day of our eternal reward, St. Timothy Catholic School will continue to joyfully instill a love of Christ and empower every child to achieve, lead, and serve with integrity and compassion.